watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The Russian Defense Ministry claims its air defenses has destroyed 73 Ukrainian drones overnight, including 3 targeting Moscow, with 31 intercepted over the Bryansk region. Near the Ukrainian border, Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin reported no casualties or damage as emergency services examined fallen drone debris. U.S. Republicans have now approved President Donald Trump's plan to slash $9 billion in funding for foreign aid and public broadcasting, framing it as a move to prioritize American interests, while the lawmakers vowed that this was only the beginning of broader spending cuts. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has threatened to sue the Wall Street Journal, News Corp, and Rupert Murdoch over a report claiming he wrote a sexually suggestive letter to Jeffrey Epstein in 2003. According to media reports, Trump denounced the story as fake and defamatory on his Truth Social amid growing scrutiny of his past ties to the late sex offender. Brazilian President Lula da Silva has slammed U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to impose a 50% tariff on Brazilian imports starting in August, calling it unacceptable blackmail and vowing not to take orders from any foreigner. The escalating trade spat follows Trump's claim of unfair practices and treatment of ex-President Bolsonaro. The U.S. has designated the Resistance Front an offshoot of Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba as a foreign terrorist organization over the April 22nd attack in Indian-administered Kashmir that killed 26 people, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has announced. Torrential rains have pounded South Korea for a third straight day, forcing over 5,000 people into shelters and killing at least 4, according to the local safety ministry, as President Lee Jae-myung urges stronger disaster prevention efforts. China's Ministry of State Security has accused foreign spy agencies of attempting to steal rare earths by colluding with domestic lawbreakers, calling it a serious threat to national security. While not naming any specific country or agency, the agency has vowed to crack down on infiltration and espionage. Nearly 600 people have been killed in sectarian clashes in Syria's Sueda province, prompting government troops to withdraw from the Druze heartland, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and AFP. The violence, which displaced nearly 2,000 families, drew Israeli airstrikes and US-led mediation. In a fiery exchange, Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, received a personal letter from Donald Trump, who slammed Brazil's court as unjust and warned of attacks on free speech. Trump urged Brazil to drop the trial against Bolsonaro, calling him a strong leader. Bolsonaro responded to this by saying that Donald Trump has sympathy for him and called his trial a global farce. Let's have a look at what Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, had to say.
Agora, se o Lula sinalizar para mim, me der o passaporte, né? Eu sei que não é ele que vai dar o passaporte. Eu negocio com o Trump. Ele fez isso para o pessoal ir conversar. Quem não vai conversar vai pagar um preço alto. E quem vai pagar um preço alto é todo o povo, em especial os mais pobres.
Meanwhile, President Lula da Silva hit back hard, rejecting Trump's 50% tariff threat as unacceptable blackmail. Speaking on national TV, Lula declared no foreigner will give orders to this president, vying to defend Brazil's sovereignty and economy. Let's listen into what Brazil's President Lula da Silva had to say.
E o que veio foi uma chantagem inaceitável em forma de ameaças às instituições brasileiras e com informações falsas sobre o comércio entre o Brasil e os Estados Unidos. Minha indignação é ainda maior por saber que esse ataque ao Brasil tem apoio de alguns políticos brasileiros. São verdadeiros traidores da pátria. aposto no quanto pior, melhor. Não se importam com a economia do país e os danos causados ao nosso povo.
Now for this discussion, we are joined by Peter Cordillo. He's a chief market economist at Spartan Capital Securities. Thank you, Peter, for joining us today. Good to see you. What does Trump's Thank you. What does Trump's intervention in Bolsonaro's legal troubles suggest about the role of formal leaders influencing foreign judicial matters?
Well, I think he portrays himself, as a big leader, and obviously most foreign entities and generally speaking, heads of governments of various states seem to accept that, acknowledge that he is the leader of the Western world, and so his ways of getting his messages across sometimes are one of using threats that usually never come to fruition, but he does manage to make everyone understand that he is the leader.
And Peter, can you tell us about the history of Bolsonaro and Trump here?
Well, not really. I don't know too much about it, but obviously what the papers are saying, it seems that there has been some sort of relationship that may be even more than we know about.
Right. And now, how does Bolsonaro's framing of his trial as a global farce reflect broader trends of political polarization to judicial independence within Latin America?
Well, I think, again, he is the president of the United States, and there are certain limits in terms of judicial international governance. And so I really don't know, how far he can push the button, so to speak, but he will push it to the maximum until he can perhaps get what he wants, what he wants to achieve.
Thank you for sharing that insight, Peter. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic. Now, in a razor-thin 216 to 213 vote, the U.S. House has approved a sweeping $9 billion recession package backed by the Trump administration, slashing federal funds for public broadcasting and foreign aid. The measure includes $1.1 billion in cuts to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, eliminating support for NPR, PBS, and local member stations, and nearly $8 billion in foreign assistance. The bill now heads to President Donald Trump for his signature. Critics call these cuts devastating, particularly to rural and undeserved communities that rely heavily on public radio and TV. Despite internal group GOP divisions, party leaders say the cuts are necessary to restore fiscal discipline, and more recession packages may soon follow. Now we go back to our discussion with Peter Cordillo. Peter, thank you for staying with us. Now, what's your reaction about this news that Trump has passed to cut $9 billion funds in aid cuts and broadcasting?
Yes. Well, he is trying to cut the deficit and trying to get fiscal discipline back in a big way. It's very unfortunate that he's cutting, public broadcasting, it's somewhat of a contradiction after his big, beautiful bill was passed, in the sense that, that's going to add on trillions of dollars to the deficits. So I think what they're trying to do is cut where they can to help alleviate these big numbers that are going to take the deficit even to higher heights because of the tax cuts and et cetera. So he's trying to basically rein in spending wherever he can to help justify some of these tax cuts that are going to create even bigger deficits.
And Peter, do you foresee political instability or market volatility if future budget cuts begin targeting entitlement programs or health care?
Well, again, political risk is always political risk, especially when you cut entitlements that are basic for many American families, such as the healthcare sector. When you begin to cut Medicare, there is always a political risk. There's no question about that.
And Peter, do you see this recession package as the start of broader shift of U.S. policies?
I think under the present administration that they will continue to cut wherever they can, and I think that's become the norm now.
Thank you very much, Peter Cordillo, for joining us today and sharing your insight. Now we move on to our next news. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has acknowledged Europe's past reliance on the US for defense and pledged to increase Germany's own defense spending, particularly to support Ukraine with long-range fire. In a visit to the UK, Merz signed a historic defense pact with Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, reinforcing bilateral ties and boosting joint military projects like missile development. Reflecting on trade tensions, Merz criticized the U.S. threat of 30% tariffs on EU exports, deeming it damaging to Germany's export industry. While his relationship with the U.S. President Trump has evolved, Merz emphasized the need for greater European defense independence. As the U.S. shifts its focus to Asia, the UK-Germany treaty also aims to foster stronger youth exchanges and direct rail links, marking a new chapter in their bilateral relations. Let's listen into what Keir Starmer, British Prime Minister, had to say.
It's a privilege to have you here today, particularly to sign this Kensington Treaty, which is a very special treaty because it's the first of its kind ever, if you can believe it, between our two countries. Yeah. And I see it very much as evidence of the closeness of our relationship as it stands today, the strength of our values, the strength of our joint approach, but also very much as a statement of intent, a statement of our ambition to work ever more closely together, closest.
Now we are joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao for this discussion. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joining us live from Tokyo, Japan. Dr. Satoru, good to see you. What does Chancellor Merz's commitment to increase defense spending and support for Ukraine signal about Germany's evolving role in European security?
Indeed, it is true. That's why he explained it. That is most important background. Because U.S. spends 3.5% of the GDP for defense, and Europe, most of the countries spend only 1%, 2%, 2%. Some country has already reached, but anyway, this is the level of the percentage of the GDP the European country is spending. So that's why there are gap. And in case of the United States, U.S. demands, since the Obama administration, first Trump administration, and Biden administration, all of these administrations continue to ask Europe to pay more for defense, but lesser than 2% is current level. So, and in case of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, last 1 year, European provide 1 million ammunition. That was better than the past. But during the same period, North Korea provide Russia 5 million ammunition, and Russia produced many. And so only in the June this year, Russia used 5,000 drones to attack Ukraine. So under such kind of situation, European countries need to show more effort to increase their production of defense equipment. So that's why, as a background reality, it is true the European hasn't spent enough level of the defense budget for a long time, and now they rely on the U.S. production. So viewed from the United States, Europeans should show more effort because this is a war for Europe. But at the same time, the timing is also the matter. Timing, indeed, this remark has happened during the U.S. and Europe talking about tariff-related negotiation. That is also true. And at the same time, President Trump's stance has changed from the past to now, last 6 months. Firstly, President Trump tried to seek the ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and in this case, he shows a pro-Russia stance. But now he is changing, his administration is changing the policy and support Ukraine more. And so this change itself is a welcome move for Europe. So now is the time to Europe to increase the defense budget from the current 1.2% of the GDP to the 3.5% of the GDP directly, and it with the 1.5% of the infrastructure for defense. So in total, this is 5%, 3.5% plus 1.5% is 5%. The European country try to spend for defense and shows the United States they have shown enough effort. So that is a good timing to say, yeah, U.S. opinion is right, and the European shows more effort. And that's why we should be the coordination in case of the tariff negotiation, or in case of the supporting Ukraine. That is my timing. He tried to say something for the United States just now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Satoru, for sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. Israel has expressed regret over an IDF strike that killed 3 civilians in Gaza's only Catholic church, following a sharp rebuke from U.S. President Donald Trump. In a statement from the Prime Minister's office, Israel called the incident a tragedy and said it deeply regrets that stray ammunition hit the Holy Family Church in Gaza City. The statement came after Trump phoned the Israeli leader to express anger over the strike, which the White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt confirmed at the press conference. Now, let's hear what the White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt had to say.
It was not a positive reaction. He called Prime Minister Netanyahu this morning to address the strikes on that church in Gaza, and I understand the Prime Minister agreed to put out a statement. It was a mistake by the Israelis to hit that Catholic church. That's what the Prime Minister relayed to the President, and you should look at the Prime Minister's statement that will be.
Moreover, Israel also thanked Pope Leo for his words of comfort after the pontiff offered condolences to families affected and called again for a ceasefire without directly condemning Israel. Now we're joined by Peter Baum. He's a foreign editor at Weekly Blitz, joining us live from London. Thank you, Peter, for joining us today. Good to see you. How does Israel... Thank you. How does Israel respond to international criticism following the strike on Gaza's Holy Family Church?
With humbleness, with apologies, with every possible means at their disposal to to tell the world that this act was indeed an accident, and accidents happen in war, and it's just a further embarrassment for the Netanyahu government and for the Israeli military. It clearly seems that this was an accident, and there was no way that they were meant to do this on purpose. And of course, the publicity surrounding this horrible act has gone global and gives yet another excuse for Israel's opponents to further criticise and demonise her. But Israel has to own up to the fact, has to apologise, as I've said, has to be very humble, and can do no more than that and try and get her publicity machine rolling in order to convince her opponents and the media that this was horrible. The fact that the response from the Vatican was, what shall we say, muted, is quite encouraging for Israel and her supporters. But nevertheless, she will continue to gain criticism for the next 24, 48 hours, and her opponents will try to whip up the frenzy of demonisation that Israel is quite used to. But at this particular case, being a Catholic church, and where millions of Catholics worldwide will be very sympathetic to those in Gaza, Israel could ill afford to have yet another horrific accident embarrass her like this one has done.
We appreciate your insight, Peter. Please stay with us as we move on to our next news. Top European diplomats have warned Iran that unless concrete progress is made on its nuclear program by the end of the summer, they will trigger the snapback mechanism to reinstate UN sanctions. In their first direct talks since Israeli and US strikes on Iran's nuclear infrastructure in June, foreign ministers from Britain, Germany, France, and the EU pressed Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi to return to diplomacy without delay. The 2015 nuclear deal, which the US exited in 2018, allows the reimposition of international sanctions if Iran is found in breach of its commitments. While Tehran has signaled openness to dialogue, it refuses to abandon its uranium enrichment, a stance that could stall any meaningful talks. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Peter Baum. Thank you, Peter, for staying with us. Now, how realistic is the threat of snapback sanctions in compelling Iran to comply with nuclear deal commitments?
Very interesting. Iran must be used to the threat of sanctions from various United Nations members. It's been suffering sanctions for years and years and years, so it's really difficult to see what further damage can be done to the Iranian economy that's going to have such a devastating impact on it. The Iranian economy is in dire trouble, as I think we've discussed before. We've spoken about the value of the Iranian rial on the official market and the black market, which I think is now trading over 1 million rials to the dollar. So will further sanctions mean that the Iranian rial is going to weaken even further, go to $1.5 million to the 1.5 million rials to the dollar on the black market? Possibly, but the Iranians are already ignoring sanctions by using the system of barter. Now, there is one other thing. There are certain other countries that will only increase trade with Iran if sanctions are imposed, such as Russia, such as China. So further sanctions, the rhetoric of it, the threat of it is one thing. What practical damage it can do further to hurt the Iranian economy is another. And I'm not sure whether any further mention of sanctions by member states of the UN, opponents of Iran, etc., is in reality it's going to have too much impact on on the day-to-day life of the Iranians themselves. Clearly, the government will be hurt in terms of not being able to use funds that they hold in other banks, whether through proxies or whether directly. But the actual practical impact of further sanctions, I fear, is more bluster and talk than going to have any real implications.
Thank you, Peter, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we now move on to our next news. The European Union has approved a powerful new round of sanctions against Russia, the 18th since the start of the war in 2022, targeting Moscow's oil exports and key revenue streams. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas called it one of the strongest sanctions packages to date. The new measures include a further reduction in the price cap on Russian oil exports, tightening the squeeze on Kremlin finances. Approval came after weeks of delay, with Slovakia finally lifting its veto following assurances from Brussels over plans to gradually reduce its dependence on Russian gas. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Peter Baum. Peter, you kind of in our earlier discussion, you mentioned how slowly the countries are getting used to, such as Iran and Russia, getting used to sanctions being put up on them. Now, what is your analysis about this sanction towards Russia? Do you think it is effective?
This something, if put into place, could indeed have implications for Russia. You see, even in the height of the Russian-Ukrainian war, countries opposed to Russia were still trading indirectly in order to get hold of Russian gas supplies, for example. Now, Putin is well aware that Europe is having an energy problem. There is no doubt about that. And resupplying Europe from other sources, which the Europeans have been working on, is a slow game. So again, the rhetoric, the bluster about imposing sanctions is one thing. What happens in practice is another. Now, clearly, Europe were hoping that President Trump was going to use his influence on Vladimir Putin in order to bring the conflict to an end. And that has not happened. And also, we've seen quite a volte-face by President Trump, originally being very opposed to Zelensky and what Zelensky was doing and supporting, in effect, Russia, and now the tables have turned. So it seems that the conflict, rather than coming to a halt earlier, is going to be extended for a period of time, we don't know which. So again, the threat of sanctions, going back to your original question, is, in my opinion, on this in this scenario, potentially going to be damaging to the Russian economy if Europe sticks to its guns and speaks with a united voice. But we know there are certain actors within the European Union, such as Hungary, let's be frank about this, that will always be supportive of one side and not the EU.
Peter, we are short in time, so I'll cut you off over there. Thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your insight as a foreign editor at Weekly Blitz. Now we move on to our next news. The White House confirmed Thursday that President Donald Trump has been diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency, a condition causing leg swelling due to poor blood circulation. Despite recent bruising on his hand, White House officials clarified that it resulted from frequent handshakes and aspirin use, which can increase bruising. Trump's recent tests showed no signs of deep vein thrombosis, heart failure, or systemic illness. Doctors stated that chronic venous insufficiency is common in individuals over 70 and not typically serious. Trump's overall health was deemed excellent by his physician.
Additionally, recent photos of the president have shown minor bruising on the back of his hand. This is consistent with minor soft tissue irritation from frequent handshaking and the use of aspirin, which is taken as part of a standard cardiovascular prevention regimen.
Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.